Hello, my name is Stephanie Blackman. For the Literary Historical Contemporary World Project, I chose the feeding of the 5,000 and the walking on water in Matthew 14:13 through 36. Literary world tools that I found um, included the deeper understanding of leftovers and repetition for the continual lack of faith from his disciples. I'll just begin with the deeper understanding of leftovers. Why were there leftovers? In Matthew 14:20, it's described that all of his followers, mentioned later in 14:21 as 5,000 men, all ate and were filled with 12 baskets of leftovers. Not only were there 5,000 men held over until their next meal, but it's also described as being filled. Therefore, we can infer that the crowd could eat no more and there were leftovers. Does this mean that God's love grace is abundant and will be filled to the point where there could be leftovers? Could it mean God's power is abundant and he will be full of miracles? Moving on, as part of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5:6, Jesus teaches his disciples that those who hunger and thirst for righteousness will be filled. Was this verse foreshadowing for this passage of the feeding of the 5,000? In Matthew 14:26 to 33, Jesus is seen walking on the water, and his disciples get scared, thinking Jesus is a ghost. This is the first lack of faith that was portrayed. The second lack of faith is when Jesus commands Peter to come with him onto the water. Peter obeys, but as soon as the wind came up, he began to sink and cried out for fear for Jesus to save him. What was the purpose of repetition for the lack of faith? Does this foreshadow the ultimate lack of faith, the betrayal? In Matthew 14:33, when the disciples say to Jesus, "Truly you are the Son of God," why does Jesus have to prove repeatedly to his disciples that he is indeed the Son of God after healing so many in the earlier chapters? For historical world, reader trying to make sense of this passage, I think it's important to understand the remoteness of where Jesus was, as long as his followers. After learning of John the Baptist's death, Jesus isolates himself by boat to the other side of the Galilee Sea. This massive crowd had been following Jesus through Galilee, the city of Chorazin, in verse 11:21, to his hometown of Nazareth, and finally to this remote location. This remote location is just outside of Herod's territory of Galilee. It's important to note this because the other side of the Galilee Sea is where he feeds the masses. Looking at maps gives a greater understanding of the distance or the trek for how far the followers traveled and why they would be weary and hungry. After feeding the 5,000, he walks on water, meeting his disciples, and they land back across the Sea of Galilee into the land of Gennesaret. In 14:34, we can see this. Another observation of the historical world is the actual food that is divided and eaten by the 5,000 men, the bread and the fish. A normal diet for his Judas followers living near this area, the Sea of Galilee, would be bread and fish. For a contemporary world, knowing these things from the literary and historical worlds can help me understand this passage for present day, the contemporary world. I think this passage teaches us today that God can handle any kind of size problem. If God can feed a vast mass of people, the 5,000 on cue, is there anything that he can't do? Is there a limit, or is there something he cannot do? I think another common theme for this passage is the faith in God. When Jesus broke the loaves of bread, he looked up to the heaven and gave blessings. While this could be interpreted as praying for the bread to feed all the people, I think it means more about putting faith in God, for he already knew God could divide the bread to feed everyone. The other examples of faith come from Peter, mentioned earlier, getting frightened, coming to meet Jesus on the water, and Peter sinking for a lack of faith. Faith is intertwined through much of the book of Matthew. I think Jesus portrays the best understanding of faith, however, in 14:31. You of little faith, why did you doubt? In Jesus' eyes, doubt is lack of faith.